It's impossible to portray God as more righteous than he is, because there's nothing gooder than good. And so the truth is portraying God as he is, which is good and just, and so all false doctrines must portray God as less than he is. And it's not a little less either. It's a lot less. In fact, all the way down into the state of Satan. So all false doctrines portray God as though he were guilty of Satan's accusations against him. Now tell me about God punishing the innocent. Isn't it funny that if you punish the innocent, you're sinning? But you'll say that God punishes the innocent, so you're putting God beneath yourself. Interesting how people try to profit in bearing false witness. They try to put themselves in a higher place that they falsely place God in, when the exact opposite is true. All false doctrines portray God as unjust, as they must. It is about portraying God and depicting him as he is, that God is lawful, that there is only one righteousness, and so there's only one standard for that righteousness, and that God operates lawfully at all times. He does not punish the innocent. He does not have wrath on infants in order for that to be diverted unto his Son. God does not hold his standard over undelivered man and then be angry at sinful man because man can't live up to it. I mean, everybody has God placing his standard of righteousness over man's head, as if he's expecting man to be as righteous as himself, and when man fails, then God is pissed off. You know, it's unrealistic for God to expect sinful man to be righteous. It's an unrealistic expectation. It's exactly what a Pharisee would do. And the idea is that a God who would do that isn't righteous. He isn't even realistic. He's operating under a delusion. Do you expect an infant to be righteous and then be angry at the infant because he is not? People portray God as not having legal distinctions, where God does not see mitigation where it exists, where God basically treats everyone as though they could have done something about their sinfulness. And so there's no distinction. They have God making no distinction between inability, ignorance. They have God treating the ignorant as if they knew better. God treating the unable as if they were able, in order to portray God as being overly severe. And it's the same thing with the limited and the unlimited atonement. It's the exact same thing. In the limited atonement, the Calvinists, the depraved, they can't do any good. They can't do anything about their state. God created them that way, but yet he treats them as though they should have. And then he's overly severe as a result. And with the unlimited atonement, it's like God expecting the whole world to be righteous, and because they aren't, he has wrath on them. And then what's he do? Divert it unto an innocent. And he punishes an innocent guy and pretends it's them. And then says, well, you see, the standard of justice has been met and satisfied because I've hung an innocent man in the place of the guilty. Yeah, that's perfect justice. That isn't perfect justice. That's a travesty of justice. It's a satanic viewpoint. The point of all false doctrine is to portray God as unjust and unlawful, capricious and arbitrary, to portray God as though he were guilty of Satan's false accusations against him, for Satan accused God of what Satan himself is actually guilty of. And Satan is obsessed with arguing his own case. Satan rebelled against God. He was unjustified in doing so, and so in order to try and make it appear justified, he accused God of the very corruption that he himself was guilty of. And so why should one obey a corrupt God? And so Satan throughout human history has been obsessed about arguing his own case, and it's the same argument over and over again, to portray God as unjust and corrupt. And that's why the satanic view of the cross, where it is viewed, the view is given, the false narrative, that God punished his innocent son to cover up the corruption of the guilty. Satan is putting himself in that place and claiming that Satan himself is innocent, and God punished Satan, the innocent, to cover up God's own corruption. And so that's why Satan always portrays God as corrupt through false doctrines. And that's what we're all about. The lawful depiction of God, where God did not punish his son and pretend it was you, and that no man can pay for another man's sins, that each must pay for his own. And that's why it says that every man has to face justice for his own deeds. God was not punishing his own son. His son came here for a judgment, for an evaluation, for a legal inquiry concerning himself and God. Jesus Christ testified that God was true or truthful, and the Father testified concerning the Son that he was righteous. And the cross, where Christ, it was permitted to fall into the hands of evil and ignorant men, to be put to the extreme test, to test him, and to show that he was obedient unto death. He loved that which is good above his own life, demonstrating his righteousness. That's what it was all about. Demonstrating his righteousness, proving wrong Satan's false accusations that God was corrupt or had an impure motive. That's what it was all about. The scapegoat, when he takes their sins outside the camp, it's not their punishment. It's him removing their lawlessness. Removing their lawlessness. When their sins are taken away, what you have left is a people in a just state and without sin. Righteousness. He modeled righteousness, and he offers it to all men. And you know what? If you do a sin that you should be punished for, fine, then you'll be punished for it. It's irrelevant to deliverance. You rob a bank, you might spend some time in jail. The punishment isn't infinite suffering. And that's why they portray God as overly severe. They go like this: sin is sin. All sin is the same. Meaning, the penalty for all sin is the same. Infinite suffering. It isn't. Never was. Look under the Mosaic Law. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. Yeah, well, if you knock out somebody's eye, it just might cost you yours. But if you want to be saved, you have to have faith in Christ. Deliverance is acquiring the lawful state. Salvation is not through punishment of sin. It's through faith in Christ. So, Jesus Christ came here, he modeled the state that man should be delivered unto, proving himself trustworthy and appointed the guardian of men's souls. Man being enslaved to sin, having a corrupt biological nature, and for the very thing I want to do, I don't do, and the very thing I don't want to do, I wind up doing. You know, what is it? The principle of the sin nature in the body, the principle of sin within the biology. And here you have the corrupt nature. And here you have Jesus Christ came to condemn sin in the flesh. Sin in the flesh. In the flesh. The biological corrupt nature. That was the problem. That and ignorance. And so whatever's the problem is whatever's targeted. For those things that are beyond man's control and are what hinders him and prevents him from acquiring righteousness, that's the things that had to be done away with. But when man does things which are under his control, you cannot blame bowing to idols. You cannot blame robbing banks, rape, murdering, and pillaging on the corrupt biological nature or original sin. You cannot blame it on that. You don't have to be a Christian to not rape your neighbor. That's why you'll read all over the place where God says, remove the evil from your deeds, because guess what? You can do it. When God tells them to stop bowing for idols, they don't need the deliverance of God to stop bowing to idols. He says, stop doing it because you can, you see. So there are things that are under man's control, and there are other things that are beyond man's control. What I call elective crimes, or the criminal code under the Mosaic law, rape, murder, burning, and pillaging, and all that kind of stuff, man is responsible for, and if man does it, he will be punished for it. Except for the principle of beneficiality, or what is beneficial. You know how it is. That if your kid does something bad and he learns his lesson and you see that he's repented, there's no point in punishing him. Because it's sort of like bearing false witness to his state. If he's repented and you see that he's seen the error of his ways and all that kind of stuff, then you can forego punishment. And there are times when punishment is not necessary. Because you see how it is. Punishment is for discipline. Punishment is to teach them a lesson. If they learned a lesson, what's the point in punishing them? Well, there isn't any point. So that's what we're all about. The true and lawful depiction of God, and the fact that it does work, and a man can speak infallibly, he can, and a man can be led by the Spirit, and that is led by the Spirit to speak the truth, which cannot be argued against at all. When you look at an infant, what do you expect out of that infant? Do you expect the righteousness of God out of that infant? Do you expect that infant to know who you are? That he's even on a planet? What you see when you look at an infant in reality is total inability, right? And total ignorance, right? You see somebody that is unable to care for themselves. You see, they are in a situation that's really beyond their control, right? And they haven't robbed banks. They don't have an evil motive. They don't even know what an evil motive is. They can't even speak the words, let alone mama. And so you see, God sees them the way they are in reality. That's the whole idea about God's justice. He sees things as they actually are. And where there is mitigation, there is mitigation. And where there's need, there's need. If someone is in an unlawful state, okay, justice sees why they are in an unlawful state. If it's because of things beyond their control. You see, a man can desire to be lawful, yet not be able to attain it. And the law will see that, if that is the case. And in that case, he does not have wrath on the man. You see. For the very thing I want to do, I don't do. And the very thing I don't want to do, I do. Well, that's no reason for God to get pissed off at you. And so, you see, whatever is causing the problem is whatever is the target of justice. Just like the slaves in Egypt. What was the problem? It was the slave masters, the Egyptians, right? It wasn't the slaves. That's what we're all about. The law, the perfect law of God. Isn't it funny that when Christ returns, what's the first thing he does? He writes the tablets of his law on their heart. How do you like that? So, it's interesting, you know, where Paul says, if I didn't have knowledge of law, I wouldn't know what sin is. He didn't say, well, if I didn't have the knowledge of grace, I wouldn't know what sin is. He said law. The thing is, here you have God, you know, man, sin, crime, punishment, Satan, you know, judge, testing, trial, evidence, testimony, testifying, witnesses, conflicts of interest. What you have here is a court of law. You have a court of law. That's why man's court doesn't have wrath on the mentally retarded because they're unable to follow the law. Well, God doesn't have wrath on the mentally retarded because they're unable to follow the law. It's interesting. It says, before the law, no flesh shall be justified. That's referring to the corrupt flesh. That's referring to a man who is enslaved to the corrupt flesh, the corrupt biological nature.